Okay, everyone. Why don't we call this meeting to order? Hopefully folks on the phone can hear us. We are recording. I will call to order the Assembly Budget and Finance Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, September 18th. We're noticed from 10 to 11 a.m. and we have a committee meeting after this, so we'll keep it tight. So first we'll do introductions and then we will move into our business.
Zach Johnson.
Daniel Volin.
Anna Brawley, and on the phone. Oh, and also we have Ms. Baldwin Day walking in. Here, I'll skip. You don't have to say on the record. So on the phone, we have Chair Constant,
Here.
Pres Verdia,
Yes, here.
and Member Silvers.
Yes, here.
Okay, thank you. And if anybody else is on the phone, please just give a shout out. We also have Assembly Council, members of the administration, and a couple of our presenters today to give updates, as well as in the back there. So let's go ahead and move forward. So first we have standing reports and unfinished business, and I will turn it to our Budget Advisory Commission Chair, Mr. Mills.
Thank you. We had a good meeting last week, presentation from Director Browse on the budget calendar and where we're at in the budget process. The commission is looking at putting together a resolution on the budget, drafting it at our next regular meeting, then maybe having a special meeting to get that finalized, so it comes out timely. Nothing too shocking. We are a little bit short on members, so we're looking at encouraging people to apply to join the Budget Advisory Commission. If any of you know anybody who'd be interested in joining, more the merrier. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mr. Mills? And as usual, folks on the phone, just text me if you want to get in the queue. Okay, yeah, I don't think we have questions. I guess the one question I do have, I know most of our board seats expire or the term ends in October. I believe Budget Advisory Commission is June. Is that correct? Okay, yeah. Yeah, so for folks out there, if you'd like to join, there's some seats and opportunities to get engaged. So with that, I think we'll move on. Thank you for being here. So next we'll go to the MOA Trust Fund update, and we have our board chair, Mr. Slivka. So go ahead.
Thank you through the chair. So just as a reminder, it's been 2 years since the fiduciary board has been impaneled. So I want to share a few things. Over the trailing 3 years through June, the fund has had a return of 9.4%. While that lags the benchmark by a little bit, it exceeds the inflation plus 4%, which is really your whole goal to maintain purchasing power and pay out the 4% dividend by over 200 basis points. So it's been a good couple of years. Having said that, returns over 9% should not be expected every year. Even though this year as well has been going fairly well. At the end of August, the fund had a value of $467 million. Should things not change that much from here, and I've communicated that with the OMB, the payout to the MOA next year could go up by $400,000. So a total of 16.9. This year it was 16.5. We are in the process of accepting applicants for our Director of Investment Operations. We hope to have that done in the next few months. We have an item that's going to come before you, I think, in the next meeting or two. We have done an RFP for a consultant, and so we have chosen the new firm. And so we are going to be asking your approval for that contract. And with that, I'll stop there and see what questions you have.
Thanks. Just one quick clarifying question. That contract, is that with Callan or is it a different item?
The firm that was selected in the RFP process was Callan. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, that is on our agenda as an unfinished item under the 11s. I don't remember the number. So that'll be on Tuesday. Mr. Constant, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. On that item, so there was a note in the memorandum to us that said that Callan was not the low bidder, but the contract or the memo did not give us a scale of the difference. And so I did some poking around and found that Callan's bid was double the lowest bid or so. What is the board's kind of rationale for what we're going to get that's worth double the other bidder?
So several things. The rationale was that the people involved, the quality of the firm, especially the idea that we are going to be expanding our use of private investments. It was the judgment of the majority of the board, not the whole board, but a majority of the board, that Callan would be best served to provide those services. I should say that in the scale of the fees that are charged, what we agreed to in this new contract is about what the going rate is in the consultant world. That the fees that we had been paying were exceptionally low. This is not in any way to degrade the service that RVK provided. It was just the determination of the board that the services going forward by Callan would be worth the extra money.
So for my part, I think that the commission needs to submit a memorandum to the assembly which details the value of the cost differential and details the minority opinion, and should do that by tomorrow or Tuesday night. Otherwise, I'm going to ask the body to postpone on this item until such a communication is presented.
Okay, we will do our best to do that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and that's because it's already on our agenda. That's a supplemental item that we could add. So
Okay.
we'll look for that. Because if I remember correctly, the reason we had postponed it the first time was to allow you guys to do that deliberation. So it would be helpful to have that in writing for sure, as the chair said. Oh yeah, Ms. Baldwin-Day, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious how many applicants you've had for the, I forget what the decided upon title was, but.
Oh,
for the-
so the Director of Investment Operations.
thank you.
So it's open now. I think the first deadline of applications is tomorrow. So we are going to have, I think, a meeting about September 29th to go over that first raft of applicants. So I'm not sure. I haven't, Philippe is supervising that.
Okay, so unclear how many folks have actually applied?
Unclear. We know of a few we think who could apply who would be highly qualified. So, but until that actually realizes itself, I can't say anything about it.
Gotcha. Okay. Is that a question that we could direct to Mr. Bryce?
I mean, I guess that gets into HR hiring policies, and I would defer to, the trust board in this position follows MOA policy. So whatever HR policy is in hiring those positions is the policy we will follow.
Ms. Prowse, did you want to respond to that also?
Yeah.
Okay. Come into.
Yeah, through the hiring process goes through HR. So once it's closed out, we would be able to let you know how many people actually applied. But while it's in its process, we wouldn't necessarily make that information public, as far as I know.
Okay, any other questions? Checking the queue. I don't see any. Okay, and then just, I will note for the record, sorry, I just had it open. The item we were discussing, not the award or not the hiring, but the other item is 11B on our agenda, the 23rd of September, and it is AM 656-2025. So just so that's clear. Okay, well, I think that is the end of our reports from the Trust Fund Board and the BAC. So next we will turn to, and I think we can decide whatever order you would like to cover these in, but reports from our OMB director and treasury on revenue, our 2025 budget to actuals, and any other updates you would like to provide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just actually forwarded the budget to actuals to Matthew for distribution. We've had some technical difficulties. My computer is currently a brick. So the budget to actuals will be distributed shortly. But so far, overall, we're 66% through the year, and the municipality budget to actuals reads as 58% spent. So there are still some outstanding financial items that have to be booked into specific departments. So that number we will see become slightly more close to the 66%. The last budget to actuals that we presented, you saw sort of a larger underspend in M&O and a couple other departments. And that was not necessarily because of their operational spend. It was that the debt service associated with that department hadn't yet been booked. And so we had a $40 million, entry that went in and brought them right up to current. So I think that we'll keep an eye on some of those things. But for the most part, we are well through the year and we are underspent. So it's going well. Once we actually get it distributed, if there are any additional questions at the end of the meeting, maybe we can go through it. The FEMA and ARPA items are also closing out. I think we are projected to have the ARPA items completely finished by the end of this year. FEMA is working through, or the OEM is working through the remaining FEMA recovery to close out those emergency projects that still exist from the earthquake. And the ML&P closeout in particular, I think the Assembly should expect to see some communication in October related to the Golden Lion and the stipulation around the October 2025 deadline as part of the ML&P sale. So we will communicate that, that requirement has been fulfilled due to ABCD, and then we can move that through the body and deliberate any questions that may remain there.
Thank you. Any questions from members? Okay, I don't see any right at the moment. I guess one just general question, and I think you said this already. So FEMA, ARPA, and ML&P, is there any kind of risks to the timelines or the deadlines that we have to meet for those three items at this point?
No, not that we're aware of. The ML&P closeout, the stipulation associated with the Golden Lion or the Alaska Center for Treatment, as it is noted in the sale documents, should all be fulfilled and have gone through legal. The FEMA closeout is our work that needs to be done in order to actually recoup the expenses associated with it. And there is not a deadline to my knowledge. And the ARPA deadline is simply spending the remaining balance of the grants. I think the municipality only has one or two still open, one of which is the administrative costs associated with ARPA. So we have done well in closing all of those municipal ARPA funding lines out.
Okay, great. Any further questions? And I'll note that we were joined by Mr. Constant in the room. Okay, well, I think those are great updates. And of course, at some point, we can remove those items as standing items from our agenda, but not until they are closed out. So with that, maybe we could move back to, and I'll say as well, budget to actuals. So even if we get them distributed by email, I think we won't have sufficient time at this point to let the public know or for us to really digest those. So I think if there are questions on those, unless they come up from folks now, I think we can say we'll save those for a future meeting. But the other piece that we wanted to cover here is a more detailed look at our revenue report. So maybe we could move to that point. Yeah, and I'm not sure who's going to be presenting, but we do have our revenue summary highlights. So that's the document we'll be looking at.
There he is. All right. I was craning my neck here.
Okay, and we're getting Mr. Cipriano set up to come to the table and getting that document on the screen.
So, Madam Chair, we brought the revenue summary highlights as of September 12th in a one-page summary format that is available on the back table or perhaps handed out by now. Just to review quickly, for 2025, at this time of the year, we expected somewhere around 58 to 65% of the budgeted revenues of $597.2 million to be in. We're at $458.7 million, which is about 76.8%. So we're a little ahead of schedule. The report says that these are SAP entered revenues as of the 12th of September, but for the monthly revenue streams, that means we're covering through the end of July. And for the quarterly streams, we're covering through the end of June. So very briefly on this page, we are through with our property tax collections. We were at 99.7%, a very successful pass-through revenue tax procedures this year. Personal property tax, those invoices go out in September and in October, and will be collected by the end of November. Root tax, I would mention, this is through the end of June. We're down probably about 17 or so percent from 2024. We had predicted a peak in revenues from the record 45.7 received in 2024. We expect our third quarter, which is usually our largest revenue period, to be down slightly. So there may be a little boost because of the Trump's visit and Putin's visit, but that's pretty hard to quantify. But we still are looking at that 25 budget figure of approximately 45 million as a good estimate. To drop down to ambulance service fees, we're looking for the SEMT contribution, which comes in a little later in the year. Every area you see that has a black mark is about 20% below where it usually is at this time of the year. Every area that is shaded gray under the 2025 year-to-date realization figure is ahead of schedule. So tobacco tax is right on schedule. We're a little ahead of schedule on our MUSA and MESA payments. And the trust fund has paid by code, it has to pay half of its dividend in June, and the funds have been sent out. I don't think the controllers group has logged them in as yet, but we paid approximately 50%, which is about $8.25 million, and the balance is due by the 15th of December. Motor excise tax is right on schedule, and if you flip over, private pill auto registration, right on schedule as well. Retail vehicle tax, that is a quarterly collected tax, and it's lagging a little bit from where we thought it would be at this time. We did forecast a $500,000 reduction from 2024, and we expect that probably to be what we will see. Building safety is a little bit ahead. Garnishment revenues are a little behind. And the municipal assistance funds usually come in after we make our annual financial report to the state. Cash pool earnings currently are listed as negative 1.4 million. We've discussed in this meeting before that valuation comes from the theoretical price if we sold every security in our municipal cash pools immediately. If the Fed just dropped rates 0.25%, 25 basis points, we expect that to cause a rally in the longer dated securities. So we're still pretty confident in that 3.0 million budget estimate that we gave at the end of the first quarter. And APD counterfines are trailing a little bit, but we are not concerned. And alcohol retail and marijuana taxes appear to be on schedule for the budgeted amounts that you see on the page. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I have Mr. Constant in the queue.
Thanks, Glenn. Currently, what's our motor fuel excise tax set at?
I believe it's 11.5%.
Percent?
Not percent, I'm sorry, 11.5.
Yeah, cents per.
Yeah, per gallon, I'm sorry, yes.
Per gallon. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I kind of like that idea.
Yeah.
But I think I'd probably get run out of town, so I'm not quite ready for that, maybe in April. But so the Matsu just raised their excise tax by 10 cents, I believe. Have you been tracking that?
No.
No. So can you at some point get back to me with a projection of how much revenue would be increased if we increased our motor fuel excise tax to match the Matsu's increase? Not to match theirs, but their increase.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Be happy
Just
to do
love to
that.
get the number.
Okay, and also note, we were joined in person by Ms. Silvers at 10:19. Other questions? Ms. Browse, go ahead.
I don't have a question, Madam Chair, but I do have just sort of a statement to make that Glenn's universe of the world, the revenue side of it, is the third piece of how we sort of know whether or not we're on track. The budget to actuals is the report that shows us what we projected our money to be and how we are spending that money. But without the revenue report, then we are not really sure whether or not the money we're spending is actually there. And so, we have the cash flow cycle within the municipality, but this piece is important for us to be able to see whether or not, our budget to actuals is looking good. We're running under our spend total. But if we lose revenue in some corner of the universe, then we're going to have to take that into account as we move through the rest of the year. So, we all keep an eye on this in a way to make sure that the whole pot of operations is going well. And for the most part, I think all of these are relatively within the bounds of, how we see them come in on an annual basis.
Mr. Constant, then Ms. Baldwin-Day.
Oh, okay, sorry, she could have gone first, but next quick question on the top line there. I know it's a small number, 0.3%, but it is $1 million differential on the tax collection. Do we know what that is, where we are on that? Why? Like, what, and is that within the norm?
Okay, you're speaking of which?
On the very top line, it says we have 351 million budgeted, 349.9 collected, and 0.3% not collected. And so we're well past the tax, we're well past the deadline of the kind of late fees and all of that. So what constitutes that 0.3% or $1 million that we have budgeted? And is this within norms? And are we going to collect it? It's $1 million.
Member Constant, I would say that I would have to get detailed breakout on basically what the variation, the origin of the variation is. And these are, of course, based on the mill rates, time the value of the individual properties. So the budget estimate is usually pretty accurate. I would need to gather that data. I'd be happy to get back to you with it.
Absolutely. And if the proposed budget was within 0.3% of the actual, that's extraordinary. It's not just good. But it does ask the question, if it says we're 99.7 collected, that's of the budget. You're saying the next question to follow that on would be then what's the difference between those taxes levied and those taxes collected? So it's maybe a slightly different piece of information. And are we in the range? Because I anticipate if economy goes the wrong way, those numbers shift and the gap kind of increases when people can't pay. And always like to keep an understanding of that. But thanks for the clarification that that's the difference from what was budgeted. And if that is true, damn, good job. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Baldwin-Day.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of questions. So with respect to building safety, are we seeing that number, that 102.6%, because that particular fund is more tied to the building season than it is to the fiscal year? Is that why that number looks the way it does?
Yeah, I would say that the building safety fees are generated by whatever individual actions like housing permits and things like that. So they're basically our estimate at the beginning of the year of what we think construction activity is projected to be for the year 2025. And it's basically driven by each and every action that generates fees for that particular group of accounts.
And then you mentioned that that APD counterfines are lagging a bit, but you're not particularly concerned about that. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to say more about why they might be lagging and why you're not concerned.
Well, the amount is really de minimis compared to the overall $600 million pie that we're looking at. So usually they are very hard to predict. They come in when they come in, and that's basically due to the activities of our traffic enforcement group. So they're, again, as hard to predict as several of the more difficult revenues that we predict, like room tax, but they're basically generated from the activities of our traffic enforcement group. So again, the amount that we're off here is de minimis compared to the overall annual revenue projection of 600 million.
Certainly, yeah. Has there been any conversation on the sort of the finance side of the house, you know, as there's been discussion about potentially implementing automatic enforcement for red lights and such, what that or how that might change this particular revenue stream?
There haven't been any discussions in Treasury per se. I don't think we would be the group who would like look at those processes and procedures and people. So that would probably be another vision, perhaps, of the finance group.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll also add on the building safety, I think the other kind of important footnote, at least for 2024, is for the first time in a long time during the first quarter budget revision process, we increased or added a small mill rate. So in addition to the permit fees that are collected, there is a building safety service area. That's why it's called that. And so we also increased the mill rate, just I think it was like 0.045. It was a very minimal because it all has to fit under the tax cap. But part of that is also why that fund is doing better. So I think by 2025, that should have been in the projection. So it's not a bump in this year. It was last year, but it's still in there, I believe. So that's the other kind of way to make sure that fund is robust. And then my question actually is following up on Ms. Baldwin-Day. Can you, Glenn, I know this isn't all of your area, but can you describe the kind of relationship, if any, between the APD counter fines and then the PFD garnishments? Because I know it's not all the same, but it does have a note here that says almost entirely tied to APD's budget. And so what kinds of reasons is the city garnishing PFDs? Or who's the right person to ask that, and how does that relate to our revenue?
This activity is done by our DCF group, and each month we get from the courts a list of fines, fees, and judgments that we are to pursue as the agent for the municipality. And the activities that we do basically are centered around the PFD distribution, because that's the probably most advantageous way to go after those funds for us. And so the activity is based on the amount, of course, of court cases we get referred to from the courts of Alaska.
Okay, Ms. Browse.
And through the chair, to answer some more, as far as our garnishments go, we are not necessarily the organization who is collecting for back child support or other things that the state collects at. Because of the order that we are able to collect in, our parents go first, so state goes first, fed, state, us. And we are able to collect for any delinquent fees or fines associated with municipal business. The counter fines, I think you can sort of equate to, if you didn't pay it at the counter, it's going to get garnished under the PFD program. They're not exactly the same, but those are sort of the operating ways that we look at them. The other point to Member Baldwin-Day's question about the timing of how some of these numbers are reflected in these reports, it's as good as the data that we have in SAP. So if, we are missing a debt service booking, as I said about, municipal maintenance and operations, that can impact what these numbers look like. It doesn't necessarily mean that business hasn't been done. It just hasn't been totaled in the reporting system to show up here. And I'm not suggesting that any of these numbers are particularly in that circumstance, but it does happen regularly across the board. So whenever we see anomalies, we want to poke into it and say, why does it look that way? And that was how we understood the differential in maintenance and operations. The building safety service area does have additional funding in it associated with that 1.5 million thereabouts under the cap. So that is part of the increase there as well.
Thanks. Other questions from members? Okay, Ms. Baldwin-Day, go ahead.
First timer, sorry. I'm curious about the municipal assistance, and I think I'm gathering from the descriptive text that this is state funding that's coming into the municipality. Can you talk a little bit about what influences this number? How municipal assistance is projected? I mean, how do we know how much money the state might be funneling our way?
We have predicted municipal assistance revenues basically by the history of what we've received in the past. It's basically a function of the state's, I would guess, prosperity budget conditions. It's very hard to predict from a distance, but we go by the stream of revenues that we've received in the past and factor them to the general health of the state itself.
And so
And-
this note in the margin that says SOA expected to make payment to MOA following receipt of annual financial report from MOA, is that,
So I would suggest Ms. Rouse maybe answer, because I think it's helpful to understand this is a specific program as well. It's not just a discretionary fund, but maybe you could explain.
Through the chair to Member Baldwin Day, the Municipal Assistance Program is what we hear all about from the state of Alaska as the Community Assistance Program, or what used to be named the Revenue Sharing and Community Assistance Program, which were two separate programs, but funded local governments for different reasons. At this point in time, the state now has just the municipal assistance, the Community Assistance Program, the CAP program, that is appropriated on an annual basis by the legislature. There is a revolving fund that is established within the state that is capitalized on an annual basis that then distributes the funding per formula. Many years ago, we used to get $20 million from this appropriation. The program was redesigned many years ago and put Anchorage as the largest municipality, sort of at a funding cap, if you will, at the bottom. So when the program is fully funded, the municipality of Anchorage is usually expecting around $4 million in funding. If that capitalization does not occur or it is not fully funded at any point during the legislative process, then that number can change. So this is part of the number that we are talking about at our other committee meetings and as part of the budget process. That is the $1 billion of missing funding from the state over the last 10 years. And this number in particular over the last 5 years has fluctuated between $0 and $4.5 million, depending on what happens. Receiving this funding is dependent upon submitting the ACFR for the year of the funding. So it does happen on a delay when we have our delayed financials.
so a follow-up question to that then, since we just finished our 2023 ACFR, is this 4 million essentially 2 years old? Or like how will this look as Mr. Falsey and his team are doing the brilliant work of catching up on our ACFR?
Through the chair to Member Baldwin Day, this is the 2025 budget number. So what we are doing is collecting for the previous year budget numbers to make sure that those are whole. As long as our financials are open and the books have not been closed and the ACFR has not been completed, we can book those monies in that budget so that it remains whole and does not run in a deficit position. I think that we see this same sort of ACFR cycle with most revenues associated with the state, including SEMT, including this municipal assistance funding, anything that we have to prove our, financial position with.
Thank you for indulging my questions.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'd say that is an ongoing topic. I know the Alaska Municipal League closely tracks that issue, and it affects rural communities as well as urban communities. So others can certainly speak to the very storied history of that project or that program. Other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any on the phone. So why don't we move on to our next item? I will note the revenue. This document basically is the short version of what goes into the 120-day memo and what goes into all of the assumptions about the budget. So it's very important and why we track it closely throughout the year. As we get actual revenue in. So let's move on to our new business. We have two items. One is not covering the full audit, but really drilling into one specific piece of it, and that is understanding how to read what our fund balance is and what the implications or significance of that is. So we'll talk about that briefly. Of course, I know the audit committee has met and discussed the results of the 2023 ACFR. There's also discussion about having a full work session to dive into that so that members can really get into the big picture. So we're not doing that here. We are going to talk just specifically about fund balance, how it relates to the audit and how it relates to our budgeting generally. So with that, I will turn to Mr. Falsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have 3 whole slides on fund balance today, and we're going to begin at the beginning. When we say fund balance, we mean a lot of different things, but here's how to get oriented. First, there is a policy that the Assembly has adopted by resolution, was first adopted in 2011, was updated in 2015, that creates a fund balance policy. And we're going to learn 2 different buckets. The first bucket is what we typically call the 10 of the 10 and the 2. It is our bond rating designation. And the keys to the kingdom that you will need to understand how to find it in the ACFR is that it is a committed item. The bond rating designation performs mostly a function that is disclosed by its name, which is that in order to have a AA or better rating from Fitch and S&P, they want to know that we have some cash in the bank so we can always make our obligations. So we have cheaper borrowing when we are able to maintain a bond rating designation. Typically, we call it the 10. There's a lot of complexity to all of this, and you can see even on the slide, the 10 is calculated as the 10% of current year's expenditures for the 5 major funds: area-wide, police, fire, parks, and roads. And then it's 8.25% for everything else, all the LRSAs and the parks and recreations funds that are not in the majors. All right, so you may have heard 10 and 2. 2 is the working capital reserve, which by the policy is 10 to 3% of the expenditures for the 5 majors and a varying amount for the non-major general funds. So when we finish the ACFR, one of the questions is always, do we have more money left over beyond the 10 and the 2 that we could spend? And one question, which was reasonably asked by the chair, is how do I read the ACFR to even figure this out? And now I will confess that it is not easy, but here's how you do it now, and we'll try to make it better going forward. If you are diving into the ACFR itself, you can turn to page 116, and you will see the fund balances. It's too long to put all on one page, but I cut it off at the top for the various things. And the first one column is the 5 major funds. And if you look closely at it, you will find a bond rating line in the committed section, which is the 10. And it will say we need about $50 million in the bank to have that 10%. Then down in unassigned, there's the working capital reserve of the 2%, and it should be about $11 million. And further confounding all of this is that it's not all cash. So there's committed items and restricted items up at the top that are grant funds and other things. And then also we even have non-cash things like the archives property rolls into the value of fund balance. Anyway, the punchline is now you're trying to figure out, do we have the 10 and the 2? Do we have more than the 10 and the 2? The way to read that, what is the spendable fund balance, is to find this line, which is inscrutably labeled other unassigned. And in the 2023 ACFR, you will see that that number is negative $51 million. And that means we have not met 10 and 2, and there is not a spendable fund balance from 2023. How do we make this a little bit more intuitive, and what else is there to say about it? Well, here is a chart that shows our actual 10 and 2 compliance since we have been playing this game for the last 10 years. And a couple things to narrate about it. First, for a very long time, we complied with that policy very faithfully. And there's always a little bit of predictable spendable fund balance at the end of the year. And why is that? Because we are good at policing the departments to say, don't overspend. And so there's a bias to spend a little bit less than 100% in all the departments. And so that typically there's a little small amount of money left over from year to year. What happened? In 2019, we had a 7.0 earthquake and we spent into the working capital reserve, which is what it's for. So when we have these unexpected emergencies. And then you'll remember we went through this traumatic period of COVID where we had a giant emergency that lasted for a very long time. And we spent all the way through the working capital reserve and deeply into the bond rating reserve and actually through the bond rating reserve. And so we had not 10, not 2, but negative 2% and negative 2.5% in 2021 and 2022. That the Assembly approved that as exceptions to the fund balance policy. We said part of the reason we have these set asides and part of the reasons that the rating agencies give us credit for it is so if something like a giant earthquake or global pandemic happens, we can weather that storm. We also said at the time, we believe that virtually all of those expenses will be recoverable. And we remember from this work session, probably 6 months ago, that turned out to be true. We recovered 99% of all of those funds, and then we collected over the tax cap from voters last go around something like $1 million to close it all out. So where do we end up? By 2023, the number in the ACFR, that missing $50.9 million, means we're back at 2. So we're not negative anymore. But 2023 is still underreporting a substantial amount of the FEMA revenues for reimbursement for COVID and earthquake that we have actually received. So the punchline for us today is there isn't a new spendable amount of fund balance as a result of completing 2023. I think it is probable that there may be, and 2024 closeout. But we're not going to have that number until March 2026. So I think fund balance is going to be a first quarter story if it shows up.
Thanks. And also I'll just
That's
note, I know we don't have paper copies of this, but they are in members' emails. So if you are not in the room and you can't see these slides, they're in your email. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thanks. So you've reported there that the 2023 is still not reporting a substantial amount of FEMA revenues. We just had some discussion that the FEMA revenues are looking good. It's almost done. Can you give us an assessment of what amount we are looking at in a general sense that is not yet reported on the books relative to the fund balance from the FEMA paybacks?
Yeah, yes. So the further complication for the story, which I didn't put on the slide, but which I'm happy to tell you, is that in the 2023 ACFR itself, there was a bunch of FEMA and recoveries that were received and are on the books, but were not in the fund that affects fund balance, but they should be transferred. They probably should have been transferred in 2023. It is a thing that we will clean up through the 2024 process. I believe if that transfer had been made in 2023, we still wouldn't be at 12. We were really close. And I don't know how to promise you what 2024 is going to look like, but if we were really close to 12 at the end of 2023, my suspicion, given the vacancy factor that the municipality has had for the past several years, is that there should be something in excess of 12 when 2024 closes.
So I didn't quite hear a number there, but what I'm thinking, if the number is short $50 million, then if you say it's really close, somewhere between $45 and $50 million in that account ready for transfer or recently transferred and not yet showing.
I think that's in the ballpark, but I don't want to give you a hard number now since I don't know it.
Yeah, I didn't
off
ask
the
for a hard
head.
number, just a kind of a ballpark, but that's okay. I think I grasped it and restated it. If there's no one who says I'm totally wrong, then my math is vindicated.
Thanks. I have a question. Could you describe, because I know we talked about FEMA, we talked about that kind of hit to our fund balance. The other piece, my understanding, and that's been a problem for several years and why we started working on it, was the ongoing deficit in the Building Safety Service Area Fund. So can you also talk about, not all the details of it, but how that factors in? Because my understanding is it counts against this balance as well, because it's basically an ongoing negative number, or it has been. So how does that relate to calculation of fund balance? Or I guess how much of that is a factor in the fund balance? Or maybe Ms. Browse is the best one to answer.
To the chair, I believe that we are actually trying to figure out exactly that detailed information right now. Because I think that there has been some differences in how that has been represented over the last 10 to 15 years. And so we are trying to interrogate exactly how that should be represented and what happens in the roll-up of it. So I think that is coming attractions in terms of what we will sort out over the next couple of months. As a point of information to, loop this into our budget process, the reason the fund balance number is important is not just because we want to know if we have any money that we have available to spend, but because historically over the last 30 years, we have spent almost $6 million from fund balance on an annual basis in order to shore up our budgets. So usually what happens is, as part of the proposed approved revised budget process, there may or may not be fund balance available in either the 5 majors or other funds that have fund balance available, because even things like the alcohol tax have fund balances. So there's the minor fund balances in the individual funds, and then the major fund balance that rolls up into the 10 and 2. And the $6 million, not being available because we don't have completed ACFR is actually a very large impact when we're trying to balance budgets and make sure that we have enough money for labor and operations. So it has been, part of the challenge that I think the Assembly has had to navigate over the last few years while the ACFRs have been delayed.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just note briefly too, I think when funds like that have a deficit, then essentially, even if we have extra funds, it gets put into that essentially paper deficit. And so that's why it matters, and why, if we can shore up that fund, whether it's through increasing the mill rate, increasing construction and permits, whatever combination, or just changing the way we do that, all of those would be on the table to really fix that issue.
And through the chair, as far as I know, based on the last numbers we looked at, I can't remember where it was, but the deficit funds were the BSSA and the IT fund, essentially, in terms of what we're trying to solve for on an operating level.
Other questions? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you so much for that overview. And again, we will be covering, not in this committee, but we'll be covering the audit more fully in a future work session to be scheduled. But I know that's of interest. And I know everybody's hard at work on getting the 2024 ACFR also finished in a much quicker timeline than the last couple. So first, I'll just check. I don't see any members of the public in the back. Is there anyone on the phone that we should plan for audience participation? Okay, I think we just have muni folks on the phone. So then the last 10 minutes we will use for a brief overview of one of the proposed taxes on the table from members. So we have both of the sponsors here. I will turn to them, but I will also note we did reach out to Mr. Martinez, who sponsored or is sponsoring AO 2025-96. That is a 1% sales tax. So we were going to give the opportunity for him to present as well, but I believe he's out of town. And so, so we can make room for that at a future meeting or another venue. And otherwise, I will turn it to, I think, Mr. Volin to kick us off.
Sure, great. So the ordinance we're talking about is the short-term rental tax. It is on our agenda under new public hearings coming up, item 14E. You will also see soon, I think, making the addendum today, a memo to go along with that. And one of the things I think I just want to highlight in the memo is that other jurisdictions have done similar things. So we're considering 5%. Colorado Communities of Aspen they do 5 or 10% depending on the type of short-term rental. Carbondale has a 6% short-term rental tax. Crested Butte has 7.5%. Telluride 2.5%, and all of these are singular to short-term rentals in addition on tax or on top of a room tax. And that's what we're contemplating, right? We have our 12% room tax that is applied to both hotels hotels, inns, and short-term rentals. And so we're proposing an additional 5% just on short-term rentals. And with the revenues dedicated to housing or associated infrastructure. The sponsors are considering an exemption for owner-occupied properties. So just kind of highlighting that is something that you may see come forward as either an S version or amendment. But that is kind of where we are now. And I guess I'll turn over to Chris if anything you want to add.
Thanks. I'll add that I agree with all of that, and the intent is to kind of start creating some resources to offset the harms that are being generated in neighborhoods that are high use short-term rental neighborhoods, Girdwood, South Addition, there are a number of them. We continue to struggle getting information from the short-term rental third-party billing companies, Airbnb, VRBO. I think there's another project I've heard some reports about that's going to kind of get to that question. But to the point Daniel just made about the idea of exempting people who are owner occupying the short-term rental, so there's a room in their house or on their property is a unit that they put in. The theory there, of course, is that if our intent is to incentivize people using creating housing in lieu of the short-term rentals, there's no net change there. But I have two approaches to the language. We're kind of contemplating it right now on how to approach it. And I think I want to aim for the broader, but we haven't come to a point. I don't know that we want to put the exemption in the charter. Instead, probably we put the authority to create exemptions in the charter, which is kind of broader, which might lead to some reductions in the future in other ways. But I think we want to think about that. I don't know that tying our hands so tightly in the charter is the way. So, but we're in discussions about how to put that forward right now, whether it's in the charter an exemption for owner occupied or in the charter the authority by ordinance to grant exemption. So.
And before you move through the queue, can I briefly describe the other project? So the other project that's moving, which is myself, Member Johnson and Member Baldwin Day, working with the administration. It's a project that I see as complementary to this is registration of short-term rentals. So it adds a short-term rental definition to code. And each different property would have a unique registration number identifying it. And there's a short list of information that those property owners would have to provide as part of that registration. There's no finite number of permits that's being considered right now or any payment for that, just that information has to be provided to the municipality.
I might on that. Since we're in the Budget and Finance Committee, treasurer is here. Previous treasurer really blew my mind in this room, and I'm just going to always say that when this conversation comes up. We passed a code, a law that says that the third-party companies need to present to us the tax information for each property, and they of course just said, you can't make us. And so that in some ways necessitates this project. I'm not on it, but I was working on a separate one and council said maybe we don't need to duplicate efforts. But we had a treasurer sit in a seat right over there and tell us, when I asked, how do you know the third party companies are actually paying us what they owe under the tax? Because we don't know what lots, who's actually the taxpayer paying, because they refused to give us that and they just gave us an aggregated number. That treasurer was a very conservative financial person, said on this record, I don't know, it's a big check. I just trust them because it feels right. And I'll be damned, we do our accounting by it feels right. And so I did have an email, I think probably several of you have, from Airbnb's government affairs person, and wanted to just meet and have a nice conversation recently, last week or two. And my response was, sure, sounds great. I included the CAO, and I also included both ordinances, this tax proposal and the proposal, the law that says they will provide us the information. So he can tell me why they're ignoring the law. And so it is a whole conversation coming forward Tuesday night.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. Two questions. First one, well, probably both pretty quick. So it sounds like there might be some changes and possibly an S version to this. I know we have the public hearing set for next Tuesday. Do you have an anticipated timeline for when you'd actually like to see action on this item?
For my part, I'm ready to go on Tuesday. If there is a clamoring for more time and information, it's not super problematic, but I think also there's not a lot of division on this question. And so if there are proposals, have them ready by Tuesday is my suggestion. And then if we don't get through it, we don't.
Okay, thank you. And the second question I have, which we can maybe answer offline, I appreciate the context about some of these other communities similarly impacted by STRs and sort of what they've done. And you talked about sort of the amount that they charge above the basic room tax rate. And I think that's helpful, and it seems to be sort of in line with what's proposed here, but didn't have what their sort of base room tax rate is, right? So ours is 12%, so we'd be going up to 17%. Does that still kind of track with what we're seeing in some of these other resort type communities?
That's a good question. I can get you that information.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Any other questions? Ms. Silvers, go ahead.
Some of the other communities that you looked at that added this tax, did they have any data on what percent of rentals, what percent of increase in long-term rentals and maybe decrease in short-term rentals? So like, were people turning those rentals over into long-term rentals?
I don't have information about that. Dean helped us do some of this research. Dean, is that something you came across at all?
To make sure I understand, by how many of them changed? I didn't find the numbers, but a consurgency.
Yeah, so
I'm
I
not
think
sure. What I generally found is that most jurisdictions have trouble finding that kind of information.
right. And I think that's where that other project is going to really come in handy once we get the registration info and we can identify unique properties. Yeah, and so I guess like sort of the impetus of, where I'm headed with this is, okay, if, short-term rentals are a complicated thing in our, not to get too much into debate, but, they bring a lot of money into the municipality, right? They also are a way that, particularly with owner-occupied properties, that people help subsidize their own mortgage payment potentially. In addition, they can be used as transitional housing, right? If somebody's moving into a new house, maybe they stay in a short-term rental while they're moving out of their old place. Or people who are new to, Alaska, for instance. I have long-term tenants now, but when they first moved here, they stayed in a short-term rental until they found long-term housing. So I guess the question I'm trying to get to is, how do we use what maybe some people see as an evil, that's, taking units off of the long-term market? How do we use a portion of those revenues for good and try to catalyze housing, whether that's public-private partnerships, office to residential conversion, putting in utility upgrades where they are needed to pave the way for housing, that maybe the municipality helping with offsite improvements, putting in a sidewalk or paving the alleyway so a developer doesn't have to. I think there's a lot of ways that we could get creative with this source of funds. And then I guess the other thing I should say is that I have been talking with Ms. Browse about that $500,000 appropriation that lapsed, where the assembly, we did intend to create, and I also have been working with Mr. Farina on this, to create a municipal housing fund, right, with $500,000. It perhaps wasn't put into the right kind of fund that it needed to be, and it lapsed, but I'm hoping that either all of that or a large portion of it will be brought back into this next budget process.
Can I
And we're
briefly
right at
respond?
time, but Mr.
Can I
Constant,
briefly
real quick.
respond to, just to clarify, I heard one question was, is there data in those communities that shows the reduction in use of short-term rentals? Was that the question, Yarrow?
Yeah, just if anybody has any statistics or
Yeah, so I had that question from the reporter when I talked to him yesterday. He asked it this way: is the intent of this project to create resources to help offset some of the harms by creating housing and creating new investment, or is it to punish kind of that punitive scale to try to push down the number of Airbnb's short-term rentals? And so I told the reporter squarely, it had nothing to do with that second category, that I personally have come to grips with the fact that it is here and it is part of our economy. People do this for a number of reasons. Some have businesses, some it's in their home, helps keep them in their home. And so for my part, the analysis was all done on what can we do to counter the negative effects, but not interfere with kind of that whole scheme. And so we didn't do the analysis on that question because we spent our time on that first part.
I guess I wouldn't call it punish. I would call it probably more incentivize what we want, which is long-term.
Fair enough.
But I wouldn't call it punishing short-term
Right,
rentals.
but that was how the reporter asked it. And I said, no, it isn't that. And there is some element we can talk about to incentivize the change by creating financial negative, I don't know what the term would be, negatives, but that wasn't in my analysis. Daniel and I never talked about that piece. It was always about adding resources to produce new housing or support the production of new housing to counter, not push down.
So it's 11:01, but I know Ms. Baldwin Day has a question. I'll ask if there's no objection to us extending to 11:05, and then we'll end by then. Okay. So go ahead, Ms. Baldwin Day.
Yeah, curious about estimated revenues for this tax on a.
So you are psychic, Mr. Falsey sent an email shortly ago. You're like reading the electrons in the room. And his question was, where's the seat? We need to come up with the process, or we need to review the process for how seats are generated. Can be done at the request of the assembly or by the administration. I can say the request for that information has been made less than like 3 minutes ago.
Fantastic.
So.
I love this. Okay. Yeah, it would be really, I'd be really interested to know, well, what is the volume of revenue that we're talking about relative to the need for something like this housing development fund that you're describing, and an infrastructure bank or something similar requires pretty significant capital. So I'm just curious what ballpark of revenue we might be looking at. Wanted to confirm also that this is paid by the guest, not the operator, correct? Okay, I think there's been some community misinformation about that. And then I think my last question is that this housing development fund, the destination or the theoretical destination for this funding, I'm still unclear whether that fund actually exists in the real world or whether that is, okay, it does not. I'm seeing Ms. Browse shake her head no. Okay, so should this AO include, or I guess this will be the AO that places the ballot measure before voters. Would there need to be a follow-on AO that buttons up the need for this particular fund and the execution thereof? Or is that something we do in a different fashion?
Yeah, so the charter amendment would allow the assembly by ordinance to administer the process. And then we would go through that process, or you would go through that process after the certification of the election in April 2026. And that's where one of my amendment proposals could be to add some exemption ability as opposed to a strict, like black and white, this is the only way in the charter amendment. And so, yeah, the assembly would by ordinance establish the function of that. Or, and again, we need to look closely at the way that language works before Tuesday to verify that, Mr. Gates. If it doesn't say that, it should. And ultimately, once the fund is in the hands of the administration, it will be theirs to implement, depending how we set it up.
Gotcha. Okay, I just don't want us to repeat the same mistake twice.
Okay, I have one quick question, and then I think Ms. Silvers does as well, and then we're going to be out of time. How does this relate to B&Bs? So I know we talked a lot about short-term rentals, Airbnbs, bed and breakfast is its own category. Is that in or out?
So I think that has more to do with the other project, the complementary project, and maybe is Mr. Falsey, you want to answer that? What are we doing with B&Bs?
Well, we have another project that is in the works and hopefully it'll get revealed pretty shortly, which is just to get better data into all of these things. And as we're ripening that project to conclusion, we realize that there is a kind of artificial divide between bed and breakfast and short-term rentals, which don't really exist as a codified category now. So if that project comes to fruition and is approved by the assembly, largely sort of collapse the difference between B&Bs and short-term rentals.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's just understanding what's in or out is going to be really important, especially if that isn't well defined yet. So, okay. And with that, I know there's a lot more discussion we can have on this topic, but it is time. And then we have the next committee meeting, the Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee and Infrastructure. I always forget one of those words in that title, is at 11:15. So we'll be back here in about 10 minutes. Thank you. We're adjourned.